Hello and welcome to the next edition of The Canadian Genius. So today I thought I would try and talk about something a bit more controversial. When I did Celebrity, I said there was about 5 different topics I wanted to do next, and that's absolutely true. But I also wanted to make sure that you guys kind of understand the depth that I'm willing to go to explain some of this stuff to you, the depth of my knowledge, because you can't really understand it until I show it to you. And I wanted something that was going to create a bit of a stir because it's not what people are used to hearing, but also open up that conversation and have the ability to grow and learn about our species, about what it is to be human. But I didn't want it to be too controversial. I didn't want to go into something like God and religion. I do have every intention of going there, but I want to kind of build up my reputation a bit first to show that I'm sincere in what I'm talking about. I'm not just trying to undermine people's opinions. I'm not trying to destroy things, right? Everything that I talk about will always include a methodology for trying to find a solution, a way to better things. So when I talk about God, there is going to be a lot of teardown, but there'll also be a tremendous amount of build up about new ways of thinking about God and stuff. But like I said, I didn't want to go there just yet. So I thought the next best one to go into that's in connection to what we're kind of dealing with right this moment is talking about the male and female dynamic. Because even though we are who we are now and we've kind of grown and evolved in such a long, such a kind of a massive way in a short relative period of time, we really have not done anything with the male female dynamic, right? We still have women that are underpaid compared to men. We still have women that are undervalued. We still have this idea that, they're still lingering in the back that women should be at home barefoot and pregnant, right? And some of those ideas are perpetuated by people who don't want change, who want things to remain the way their great grandparents had it, right? But that doesn't exist. That's not real, and in reality, there are certain countries where that's still the norm, right? That women are almost property. In some countries, I think they are property. And we don't have a lot of say on some of that. But the more we deal with our own self, the more we deal with our own stuff, it also helps to set an example that other countries and other people can follow. Because let's take a minute to be completely honest. If you're in a country where women are segregated and subjugated, and then you look over to North America and women are separated, segregated, and subjugated, but in a different way, it leads permission for them to do the same their way because they have history with it, right? They have thousands of years of history typically of women being less than. But as long as we keep saying women are less than, they're right in what they do. And if we can get to the point of saying no, women are equal and everybody's equal, then that makes it harder for other countries and other places to subjugate women still, because now we are legitimately saying we're equal. Because it doesn't matter what you say, it matters what you do. And we fail horribly at treating women with equality. Now, part of that, we need to actually address what equality is. Because most people, when they're talking equality, are not looking for equality. They're looking for superiority, right? They claim that that's equality, but if you really look at what equality is, it means no preferential treatment of any nature, no additional of anything. So no extra money, no extra perks, no extra benefits, no extra privileges. That's everybody equal. And that's not what we want, right? We want equality, but we want the perks, we want the bonuses, we want the extras that nobody else gets anyway, but that we should have because we're special, but we're equal. And it's that dichotomy that causes a lot of the conflict, inequality, because people are not asking for what they're asking for. They're asking for something different. So that's one of the first things we have to accept in this male-female dynamic, is that one cannot be better than the other. But unfortunately, genetically, that's never going to happen because one sex is always going to be better than the other. And unfortunately, guys, it's not ours. We, as males, like to think that we're the superior species, but we're not. Because in the genetic race for life, we're a footnote. And it's because our contribution in procreation is that's it. That's why we're not superior. And that's the same with many other animal species as well, is that the female dictates who gets to survive, who gets to procreate, who gets to have children. And that's a tremendous power. And that's why if you look at a lot of different animal species, women, the females of those species are almost treated like gods in a lot of ways. But then you've got a lot of other species where they're segregated. If you look at our closest relatives, at things like the gorillas and the apes and things, it's very common that there's like the alpha male that dominates a harem of females. But that's because that way they're the ones that get to procreate because they found a solution. Well, we did the same thing. We tried to basically mimic them by evolving into the same basic idea that we're going to control women so we get to decide who gets to survive. Well, that's never really worked well for us because as reality has shown, women are always going to have special power over men. And there's nothing that any of us can do about it. And probably shouldn't, because it's a pretty good system in a lot of ways. Now, one of the reasons I'm going to refer to the joke, it's a bit crude, but it's the only one that I have that really sums it up quite well. And that's that men don't have enough blood to run both heads at the same time. Quite accurate, actually. That, when you get into that position, you're not thinking because the hormones are raging and everything is flooding your system and you can't think. Well, women have the same problem, except they don't swell up the same way. Women's parts do indeed swell the same as men's. Men's just swell more and require more blood to do so. And because our frames are bigger by normality, we need more blood to function. So when we lose it, we lose it. Which is also why males tend to get so violently aggressive when they're denied female companionship, just like a gorilla, just like an ape, just like a Neanderthal. Because we're not prepared to accept who we really are, and we're not accepting of this simple reality. It doesn't mean that women are superior, but they do have special power. But men have special power too. And it's that all of those pieces together that make us equal. But to say that we're equal in the same way is ludicrous because all of us are different. There are no two people on the planet that are exactly the same. Even identical twins usually adopt alternate personalities because we're not designed to be the same. Right? Our genetic evolution is entirely based upon diversity. If you get into a closed society without a lot of genetic introduction, that population segment degrades over time, which is why a lot of isolated communities go outside to find new children, if you will, right? Even some of the more primitive tribes have done that. They go and capture women to bring new blood into our tribe, because if they didn't, they would become evolutionarily weak. And we've unfortunately, because of our society and our evolution, have become spoiled for that diversity. We live in a society where we're living with everybody, right? So we've got diversity from every level of the planet in pretty much almost every major city. You can't go to many places and not run into every ethnic group, right? It just doesn't happen anymore. And that has led to a lot of other stuff and a lot of intermixed breeding, which I'm going to talk about as a whole nother topic because there's a lot of fascinating pieces to that really should be talked about. But because of that spoiled nature, we've then become so arrogant in our superiority about it, right? We have people that, it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, every single ethnic group thinks they are the superior group. And each has superior traits and lesser traits. It doesn't matter who you are. But every group that believes they're superior is all for the exact same reason. Arrogance. That sense that we're better because we're better. Not we're better because we do this or we're better because we do that. And if you look at a lot of different ethnic groups, it's amazing the different viewpoint of sex. Like, in North America, we're some of the most inhibited people there are. Like, sex is just taboo. Don't talk about it. Don't want nothing to do with it. But oh my God, do we want it? Right? Where other countries are more open. And there are some countries where, men as a normal rule talk about dominating women. And I know we do that, but other countries do it worse. And it's because we don't understand our place in the world, right? We use our lack of self to defend against a social construct that was perpetuated hundreds of years ago that hasn't evolved with us. And unfortunately, because there are people that want to perpetuate that, there are men who want women to be subjugated at home, pregnant with 87 kids, and no thought in their head, right? And they'll perpetuate that. And they're allowed to because we call free speech a right. And there's a point that that's okay, but I'm not going to get into that one today. That'd be another topic. But the reality is that if we are willing to accept who we really are, we know that we're not special, we're not less than either. And that confuses us because we want that hierarchical structure, right? Because that's what we're used to, right? We come from a place of kings and rulers and lords and all this other stuff, right? Every society has that. I mean, now they've evolved into presidents and prime ministers and khans and all these other titles, but it's the same thing. It's a hierarchical structure. And we do this all the way down to everyday life, right? The guy that works at 7-Eleven, he's less than the guy that does the garbage. And they're less than the guy that does the post. And they're less than the guy that does the, everybody's on this hierarchy of rank, right? And it's all subjective because it's not based in reality. To say that one person is more important than another, as I get into another topic about interaction between people, you will realize that there is no one person that's better because nobody can do anything without all of those other people, right? Like just looking at the garbage disposal. Imagine our society if you got rid of that. How quickly we would probably die off because we're lazy. We barely take our garbage out to get it disposed as it stands. Could you imagine if nobody was there to take it away? And look what we do with it when we do take it away. We just usually dump it somewhere else. So, but all of that is for the same thing because we're living this hierarchical structure. And you can't be in a hierarchical structure and then not look at men and women and go, well, why aren't we in a hierarchical structure with them? Well, but that's the problem. That's the definitive issue, is that hierarchical structure doesn't exist. It isn't real because this person is better at this person's better at that, this one's a woman, this one's a girl, this one's a boy. It doesn't matter because each of us has unique talents. Each of us has different things. But because of our differences, because we do things so differently, that's also what causes confusion. The fact that women do tend to backstab and undercut, where men tend to be in your face and aggressive, causes both sexes to be confused because each is looking at the other going, why are you doing that? And the reality is almost all of it is for the exact same reason, because they want to mate. The problem is that, like I said, because we've become so spoiled genetically, we don't stop and think about what's available. It's amazing if you look how many people are looking for relationships. It's not 3 or 4, it's like 3 or 4 billion, right? Everybody's looking for somebody. But why aren't we finding them? And the biggest reason is because what are we doing? We're sitting at home, closed off, not out looking, not risking, not developing. And so we lose out. And then that creates, again, more need for a hierarchy. Because now we have to justify and defend our bad habits. Right? It used to be fairly simple that people could go out and do things and it wasn't that big of a risk. But now, unfortunately, we've got date rape drugs, we've got rapists, we've got child molesters, all this other garbage that probably has been around for a long time. It's just difference in thinking, right? You look back 20 years, rape was considered a very different thing than it is today, right? And we need to get to that evolution. We need to bring our minds up to our level of development. And that's the one thing we haven't done. And so we keep this hierarchical structure and we want men to be here and women to be here and all this other junk. And even in men that do it, it creates this dichotomy because we know we're equal, right? We know deep down that we're not better, we're just different. And then you crush somebody. You have to justify that. You have to work through that in your mind. And that's where a lot of that stuff gets out of hand. And like I said, with people that, get violently aggressive because they didn't get a female, it's the same exact thing happening. It's a primal urge, but because they're not dealing in reality, they're not facing that urge. Because everybody's got it. Everybody wants to have sex. Everybody wants to procreate. It's a direct biological need. The problem is, this is the need. This is the want that we tell ourselves we have to have. And that's what causes dysfunction. If you look at it, at the history of violence, the more sex people have had, the more violent they become. Because in having sex, you want more sex. When you had a structural societal limit that said this was the only thing that was appropriate, it had the advantage of keeping everybody in check. It had a lot of disadvantages, a lot of them. But we're talking about just procreation for a minute. But we don't want that because of other social pressures, right? We are encouraged, our social guide, the thing that we try desperately to become is, a family with 2.3 kids, a dog, a cat, and 3 cars, right? That's kind of the dynamic that we've created, that's normal. Normal is you get married, you have kids. Well, not everybody's going to get married. Not everyone's going to have kids. And that's perfect. Not everybody needs to have them. What matters isn't that you have kids. What matters is your life, right? You can make a massive contribution to life and still never have kids. I mean, look at people like Mother Teresa. I don't believe she ever had children because she was a nun. That's the chastity. Vow of chastity goes with that, right? But look at how many people she touched and how much of the world she changed. We can say to ourselves, well, we're not good enough, but that's not true, right? But it's all of that inner confusion. That's all of that information in our head, but we don't stop and think, what does that mean? And if we just accept that women have a biological superiority over men in that they get to decide who has children and who doesn't, it doesn't make them better. It's just reality. Men, on the other hand, get to decide what women they get with, but it's their call whether you get with them or not. That's why you see men basically going after 50 women, but women typically go after 1 or 2 guys because that's that social dynamic. There are a number of animal species that it's not uncommon that the female will have multiple males. In one, I know there's a bird species that the female will actually go and procreate with the aggressive male and then domesticate with the more supportive male, so that the genes are the strongest, essentially idea the strongest, but they've got the support of someone that's going to care for the young and themselves, right? And that's works in a primitive brain. Our brains are no longer primitive. Our brains are now evolved and massive, but we still hold on to these biological urges and we blow them out of proportion because we never, ever, ever stop to think what we're doing. And that's an important thing, but that's why men and women are going to always have this fight, right? Because men are about control, right? That's what we've been taught for hundreds of thousands of years. Control, right? Control the herd, control the crops, control the migration, control the building, control the people, we're evolving out of it, but that's what we're taught. And along the way, what did we do? We taught women subservience, obedience, do what you're told. And even to this day, what do we do with little girls as they're growing up? We do the same thing to them. We say, do what you're told, don't talk back, don't do all this other stuff. Well, geez, what a surprise that our little girls turn out to be dysfunctional women. We taught them how to do that because of all of this garbage. Instead of just saying, men and women, we each have our role to play. Each has a purpose. But neither is necessarily eventful without the other, right? We as society have adopted other ways of doing things so that partners can be pulled out of that mix, right? Women can get pregnant without ever having a male ever be there, and males can have children through adoption or surrogates or all this other stuff without ever having a female be there, essentially. And we've done that because we're isolating. And that's really the key behind that hierarchical dynamic, is our isolation. And the more that we get isolated, the more we feel separate, the weaker we start to feel. And for men, that unfortunately rages out itself in domination. And I do mean rages out itself because that's where men typically go, right? Women typically don't have to fight for men because men are kind of dumb in that sense. Men will go after women, right? And that's another thing I'm going to talk about in another time. Well, maybe I could talk about it here if I go longer. I think that would be okay. But if you look at that dynamic, men don't really care a lot about how a woman looks. All they care is that they're available and that they're there. Really, that's sort of the absolute of male. Women, on the other hand, want to attract a male. They want to have somebody that's more into them, that's part of their lives. And that's why women are spending so much time and effort to look beautiful instead of be beautiful. Notice the difference in those terms? How many people are taught to be beautiful? We're so busy trying to look beautiful. And that's not good. But again, it's all back to the same hierarchical, right? Men and women are different. We're supposed to be. Women want to attract a male. And the easiest way to do that is to look youthful. And so we have makeup and we have cosmetic surgery and everything, which does what? Makes them look younger. The problem is men aren't really that concerned. They are to some degree, and there are a lot of very vain people in the world. And if you want a vain person, then being a vain person is a good way to get a vain person, right? If you care about how you look and how they look, you're more likely to attract somebody that cares about how you look and they look. Looks are important, but they're by no means critical. That's why you can see people that you look at them and go, that seems like a really odd pairing. Because looks are only one component of a relationship. And it's because we're not prepared to face that. So really, if we want to get over this male-female dynamic, all we have to do is get out of this idea that men are supposed to be one way, women are supposed to be another. Because that's what creates that conflict. And that's 1,000-year-old thinking. We have evolved massive technology. We can do things that have never been possible anywhere on planet Earth. And yet we still think exactly the same way as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. Because we don't ever take time to look at human. We'll create a sex robot long before we'll give somebody the opportunity to build up self-control. Right? Because that's just the way our society is. And that's stupid. Because if we don't build up self-control, we basically encourage people to rage out. Because what's the alternative? There isn't one. But if we teach people that it's about more than that and help guide them to that, then we can see a lot of that. There was a show I saw on television. I don't remember which science show it was exactly, but they were talking about bonobo monkeys. And there was this troop of monkeys. And their society was very similar to everybody else, right? The alpha was on top and the top males and then all everybody else on the bottom. And in their society, the top males ate first. And it just so happened that they came across a bunch of tainted meat and the top males all ate and died off. And the rest of the society was then required to readapt itself to having lost these top males. And what they found was that this group that went from being very typical bonobo, arrogant, anarchistic society became a very open, honest, cooperative society. It wasn't the females became in charge, it was that everybody became more equal and everybody was more helpful. And what they found is that the adolescent males, as they were kind of growing up, needed to kind of be smacked down a little bit to get them to kind of understand the politics of the place before they would kind of adopt their role. But that shows that we are in this hierarchical state because of primitive biological forces that haven't been needed for a couple hundred years now, right? Back when we were still nomadic, that might have been important. Back before we were as industrial as we are now, maybe that still had a place, but it most certainly doesn't anymore. And there are many governments. I know the British government, I was watching another documentary, and they were talking about how ruthlessly hierarchical they are. Like, just nasty. Like, everything that they do as normal in almost every other country would involve hundreds of lawsuits. And that's their structure. But do we really want to claim to be evolved and yet act like primitive beasts? Because that's what we're doing. We're claiming that we're an evolved species, but we aren't, which is, I think, why everybody has issue with the word animals. Because we all know we're not much better than animals because we're following our biological needs. We have better language and better technology, but we're not doing anything different than we did 5,000 years back, 1,000 years back, 100 years back. It's all the same stuff. We just have more toys to play with. And we know that inside, but we don't want to face it because one of the issues is we don't know what it means. What does it mean if we face it? What does it mean if we change this? We understand everything perfectly. Male, ego, asshole, women, subjugated, subservient, everything is good. No, it's not. If you give people the opportunity to become who they are and not focus on what's between their legs, they can become human. If that means that they become a kind, caring, compassionate, effeminate male, or become an aggressive, domineering, capable, I don't know what other, there's a word I was trying to think, it wasn't coming, but female, like power-hungry female, what does that matter? Right? The only issue that has ever come up from that is men who are claiming to feel demasculinated because of these strong women. You didn't have the masculinity to begin with. You're not male. You just have a dick between your legs. Because there's a lot more to being male than just having genitals that look male. Right? But we don't know what that means because we're so busy trying to dictate what it means. We don't explore. And so the male-female dynamic is about control. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about not liking the position that we've been given, and instead of changing the dynamic and finding a new and better way to do things, we perpetuate what we used to do and hide indoors and hide behind technology. If you really want to go meet somebody, go out and meet somebody. You have nothing to lose. The reality is that 99.999% of the world's population are amazing, wonderful people. It is amazing how amazing and wonderful they are. It's us that is so closed off and alienated. It's us that's so busy hiding from them because we're afraid of what if. Now, what if is a big topic that I will also talk about in another video because it deserves its own. But the point is that men don't need women any more than women need men. You can have them. If you want to have children, then maybe you want to go that way. But nowadays, we don't need it. We've evolved the technology to make sure that we don't need the other sex, to have to have children especially. So we can avoid all of that if we want. It's not what we want, I guarantee it, because otherwise we would have already done that. We want that companionship. But how can you have companionship when you're telling somebody they're less than you or that you're less than them? That doesn't work. That's not companionship. That's now male or subservient dominant relationship, male-female garbage. If you want a companion, what is your thought of that? What does that mean to you? And most people, it's somebody that's equal. Well, you can't have somebody that's equal if you're looking for somebody who's more or somebody who's less, or if you feel more or less. So that is the trick, and that's another major thing that you're going to gain by listening to me and hopefully adopting some of what I'm teaching, is that you will learn so much about yourself and who you are and how you think and how you function that you will hopefully grow and evolve into something immensely more powerful. you. Because as I've said before, and I'll say it a billion times again, there is nothing more powerful on the planet than us being ourselves. It is the pinnacle of what we can achieve. And there's no technology involved. There's no cost financially. There's a tremendous cost mentally and emotionally because we have to dig through all the garbage that we've piled up in our lives. But if we're willing to do that, we win. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, right? And then we can get rid of that hierarchical issue. We can get rid of that superiority complex that we like to claim. And a big part of it starts with stop treating our girls like they're less than, right? My two children, I have a boy and a girl. And when my daughter was born, I was kind of really a little bit leery about roughhousing with her because she was a girl. And that lasted for about 2 seconds. And then I went, idiot. Because she's a human. She's not a girl. That's just her sex. She's my daughter. I don't want to say her name because I just don't want them to get into trouble because they're young. My daughter's 6 and my son's like not even a year and a half yet. But I had that thought. Right? And then when my son was born, I had the opposite thought. Like, well, I don't want to smother him and give him kisses and idiot. Again, lasted about 2 seconds. I treat them the same. Right? I roughhouse with both of them. I hug and kiss the crap out of both of them. I tell them I love them all the time. And it's not because I'm emotional or I'm effeminate. It's because I'm human. Because I'm me. I know my worth. And I want to teach them worth. And you can't do that. Unfortunately, that's one of the biggest issues that we have with this power struggle and superiority complex is we've entered into this societal structure where everyone's less than. Right? You're less than because of that hierarchy, because there's a prime minister, a king, an emperor, a ruler, a pope, a god. As long as that kind of exists, we're always going to be less than because we're busy putting everybody in place. And that creates dysfunction in ourselves. And that's where that comes from. And so we're less than. Well, if you're less than, you're going to teach your kids to be less than, even if you don't mean to, because you're you. You're going to do things the way you do. Most people become their parents because they don't stop to think about other options. It's reactionary. And when you're reactionary, you get what you're programmed to do, which is what you grew up with. So you become your parents, just as they became their parents and they became their parents. But each generation is a little bit different. There's always flux. You're never exactly the same. You might have a lot of similarities, but there's always difference. So what I think I'm going to do, since we've just had this big topic of conversation, I think the next one I'm going to do is go into how to build self-worth in our women and our girls, because I think that's very important. Men, there's a lot of stuff already built for them to build self-worth. So I'm going to maybe touch on it a tiny bit. But there's really nothing right now built around women gaining self-worth. The stuff we have doesn't work because, again, like I just said, it's coming from people who don't have self-worth. There's a lot of great ideas. They're just missing components because they don't understand what they're missing. And you can't understand what's missing until you see in yourself what's missing. That's one of the keys of life. And I will talk about that a lot more over the time. So I'm going to stop there because we're at like 33 minutes, which is, I think, the longest video I've ever made. This is like my 4th series or something I've worked on. Ooh, that turned out to be a good one. So anyway, I will be right back for another one. Hope you'll join me.